The pre-dawn cold bit through the thin walls of my cottage, pulling me from shallow sleep. I'd grown used to waking before the sun. It was safer that way. Less chance of crossing paths with the others when they were fresh and eager to remind me of my place. The floorboards creaked their familiar morning song as I shifted beneath my threadbare quilt. And for one blessed moment, I existed in that space between sleep and waking, where loneliness couldn't quite reach me. Then I felt the warmth. My eyes snapped open. There, nestled against my ribs beneath the covers, were two small bodies radiating heat like tiny furnaces. My breath caught. Slowly, carefully, I lifted the edge of the quilt. Two wolf pups blinked up at me with eyes too aware, too ancient for their size. One was slate gray with a white blaze down its muzzle. The other was russet brown with oversized paws that promised future strength. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, yet they watched me with an intelligence that made my skin prickle with instinctive recognition. Wolves, not dogs. Actual wolves, in my bed. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sat up slowly, the pups tumbling into my lap with small yips of protest. This wasn't possible. Our territory was protected, warded against wild animals. The only wolves allowed within the compound walls were... The realization hit me like winter water. These weren't wild wolves, these were pack children, shifter young who hadn't yet mastered the transformation back to human form. "Oh no," I whispered, my voice hoarse with sleep and rising panic. No, this has to be a mistake." The gray pup nuzzled against my palm, making a sound somewhere between a whimper and a purr. The russet one climbed up my nightgown, tiny claws catching in the worn fabric, until it could press its cold nose against my throat where my pulse beat its terrified rhythm. I knew what this meant. Everyone in the Silver Moon pack knew what this meant, even those of us who lived on the margins, who were tolerated rather than welcomed. The Luna trials happened once every few generations, when an alpha king reached his prime without having claimed a mate. The king would choose candidates, usually the strongest, the most beautiful, the most connected females in the pack, and his young would be sent to test them. Children knew. Even in their wolf form, especially in their wolf form, they knew who had the capacity for nurturing, for protection, for the fierce tenderness that made a true Luna, but they couldn't have chosen me. There had to be some mistake. I was Ela, the orphan girl who lived in the forgotten cottage at the edge of the western woods. My parents had been Omegas, the lowest rank, and they died when I was 7, taken by a fever that swept through the pack 12 years ago. I'd survived because old Marjorie, the healer who'd since passed herself, had kept me isolated in her cabin during the worst of it. Since then, I'd been invisible. A shadow moving through pack gatherings, serving food at festivals, mending clothes for those who threw me a few coins, growing herbs in my tiny garden to trade for bread and cheese. My blonde hair, so pale it was almost white in certain light, marked me as different, even among a pack of shifters. My small frame, my quiet voice, my tendency to flinch when anyone moved too quickly near me. These were not the qualities of a Luna. The trials were meant for females like Sienna Redclaw, whose father led the warrior class and whose beauty was legendary, or Vivian Nightshade, whose cunning had won her a place on the Alpha Council despite her youth. Or even Celeste Frost, whose ice-blue eyes and sharp tongue commanded respect in every room she entered. Not for me. Never for me. The pups squirmed in my lap, and the russet one let out a tiny howl that was probably meant to be fearsome, but came out adorable instead. Despite my panic, I felt my lips curve into a small smile. They were beautiful, these little ones, innocent in a way that adults never were, carrying no prejudice, no awareness of social hierarchy. "Your father made a mistake," I told them softly, stroking the gray one's soft fur. I'm nobody. When the sun rises, I'll take you back to the Great Hall, and we'll sort this out, okay?" The russet pup actually growled at me, and I recognized the stubborn set of its little jaw. Oh, this one would be trouble when it grew up. A knock at my door froze us all. It was barely dawn. The sky outside my single window still held that deep purple that came before true sunrise. No one came to my cottage. No one ever came to my cottage except the herb merchant once a month, and he wasn't due for weeks. Another knock, harder this time. The pups' ears flattened against their skulls, and both of them pressed closer to me, trembling. Their fear sparked something primal in my chest, something that pushed past my own terror to create a shelter with my body, curling protectively around them even as I called out, "Who's there?" "Open the door, girl." The voice was female, clipped, authoritative. I recognized it immediately. Counselor Vivian Nightshade. The Alpha King sent me to verify the placement was successful. My mouth went dry. This was real. This was actually happening. With shaking hands, I wrapped the pups in my quilt and stood, padding barefoot across the cold floor. I cracked the door open, and Vivian's sharp gaze immediately dropped to the bundle in my arms. She was beautiful in the way that winter was beautiful. All clean lines and lethal edges, her dark hair pulled back in a severe knot that accentuated her high cheekbones. She wore the formal black and silver of the council, and her expression revealed nothing. "So it's true," she said, her voice carrying an edge I couldn't quite interpret. "He actually placed them with you." "There's been a mistake," I said quickly, the words tumbling over each other. I shouldn't be. Please, I'll bring them back right now. I never meant." "There's no mistake." Vivian's eyes narrowed. Alpha King Rowan doesn't make mistakes. He observed all the unmated females during the Harvest Moon gathering last week. He watched how they interacted with the pack children during the autumn games, and he made his choice. She paused, her gaze raking over me with an intensity that made me want to retreat into my cottage. All three of his choices. 3. There were 3 of us in the trials. Who are the others? The question escaped before I could stop it. "Sienna Redclaw and myself," Vivian said, and something flickered across her face. Was it resentment? Surprise? "The formal announcement will be made at noon in the Great Hall. All 3 candidates are required to attend with the children they've been entrusted with. Do not be late, Isla. The Alpha King's patience has limits." She turned to leave, but I called out, "Wait!" When she glanced back, I forced myself to meet her eyes. Why me? I don't understand why he would choose me. For a long moment, Vivian studied me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Then she said, "Perhaps that's exactly why he chose you. You don't expect it. You don't hunger for it." Her lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Or perhaps he simply wants to see if you'll run. She walked away, her boots crunching on the frost-touched ground, leaving me standing in my doorway with 2 pups and a future I'd never imagined, one that terrified me more than any nightmare. I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs suddenly weak. The gray pup wiggled free from the quilt and dropped to the floor, immediately beginning to explore my small cottage with nose-to-ground intensity. The russet one remained in my arms, those 2 old eyes fixed on my face. "What am I going to do?" I whispered to it. It licked my chin, and despite everything, I laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed in my empty cottage. The sun was rising now, painting my walls with fingers of golden light. I had 6 hours until the announcement. 6 hours to figure out how to present myself at the Great Hall without dying of humiliation, when everyone saw that the Alpha King had inexplicably included the orphan Omega in his Luna trials. 6 hours to pretend I was someone worthy of standing beside an Alpha King. The pups needed food first, that much was clear. I set the russet one down and moved to my small kitchen area, pulling out the dried venison I'd been saving for winter. I tore it into tiny pieces, watching as both pups attacked their breakfast with enthusiastic growls that made them sound like the fierce predators they'd someday become. While they ate, I caught my reflection in the small, cloudy mirror above my wash basin. My blonde hair hung in tangles past my shoulders. My nightgown was more patch than original fabric, and my face looked too thin, too pale, too ordinary. There was nothing special about me, nothing that would catch an Alpha King's attention. Unless Vivian was right, and that was exactly the point. I'd seen Rowan from a distance, of course. Everyone had. He'd taken the leadership 5 years ago when his father fell in battle against the Shadowfang pack, and at 28, he commanded respect through sheer presence alone. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that he wore slightly too long and eyes that were said to see through any deception. He was just, they said. Fair, but unforgiving. Strong enough to hold our territory against all threats, and completely, utterly beyond my reach. The pups finished eating and immediately began wrestling with each other on my floor, tumbling and nipping with joyful abandon. I watched them, feeling that strange, protective warmth bloom in my chest again. They were his children. Rowan's children, which meant somewhere in the pack there was a mother, or mothers, who'd given birth to them. The Alpha King wasn't mated, but that didn't mean he was celibate. It wasn't uncommon for powerful wolves to have children before they chose their Luna. These pups would have been born to strong females who hoped their sons or daughters might be the key to winning the Alpha King's heart. Instead, he'd taken them and sent them out to find his mate himself, using the oldest test in our culture. Trust the children. They know truth. They know hearts. Why did you pick me? I asked them softly. The gray one paused in its wrestling to look at me, head cocked. Then it padded over, climbed into my lap, and curled up with a contented sigh that said more clearly than words, "Because you're ours." The russet one followed, settling against its sibling, and within moments, both were asleep. The instant, total sleep of the very young who feel completely safe. I sat there on my cold floor, holding two pups who believed I was their mother, and felt the weight of impossible expectations settle onto my shoulders like a mantle made of thorns. By noon, everyone would know. By noon, I would have to walk through those great hall doors and face not just the Alpha King, but the entire pack who would wonder what madness had possessed their leader to include me in the most important decision of his reign. By noon, my invisible life would end, and whatever came next would either destroy me or forge me into something I couldn't yet imagine. The pups snored softly in my lap, trusting and warm and utterly unaware of the storm their presence had created. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and the morning birds began their songs, and somewhere in the great hall, an Alpha King waited to see if his gamble on a broken, forgotten girl would prove to be wisdom or folly. I had 6 hours to prepare. It felt like I had no time at all. I spent the next 3 hours in a state of controlled panic, doing everything I could to make myself presentable while the pups alternated between sleeping and exploring every corner of my cottage with relentless curiosity. The gray one. I'd started calling him Storm in my head, though I had no right to name the Alpha King's children, had discovered my herb bundles hanging from the ceiling beams, and seemed determined to taste each one. The russet one, who I'd mentally dubbed Ember for the way her fur caught the light, had claimed my only spare blanket as her personal territory and growled at Storm every time he came near it. They were already showing such distinct personalities. Storm was adventurous, fearless, constantly pushing boundaries. Ember was possessive, protective, watchful. And both of them kept returning to me, checking that I was still there, pressing against my legs, or climbing into my lap whenever I sat down. The bond was forming. I could feel it like threads being woven between us, something ancient and instinctive that had nothing to do with logic or social standing. They'd chosen me on some level that transcended pack hierarchy, and with every passing hour, the connection grew stronger, which made what was coming even more terrifying. I heated water over my small fire and washed as thoroughly as I could, scrubbing away the fear sweat and the dust of my forgotten cottage. My hair took the longest. It fell nearly to my waist, and I had to work through countless tangles with my broken comb. When it was finally clean and dry, it caught the late morning light streaming through my window, looking almost silver. My mother's hair, Marjorie used to tell me. Your mother had hair like moonlight on water. She'd been beautiful, my mother. I barely remembered her face anymore, but I remembered her gentleness, the way she'd sing while she worked. How safe I'd felt in her arms. Would I have made her proud if she could see me now? Or would she have been horrified that I was being thrust into the Alpha King's attention? My wardrobe was pitiful. 3 dresses, all of them worn and faded. The best one was a deep forest green that I'd been given 2 years ago by a pack member who'd felt charitable after I'd healed her daughter's persistent cough with the right combination of herbs. It had been fine once, probably, but years of wear had faded it and frayed the hem. It would have to do. I had nothing else. I braided my hair in a simple plait down my back. I didn't know how to do the elaborate styles the higher-ranking females wore, and splashed my face with cold water one more time, trying to bring some color to my pale cheeks. When I looked in the mirror again, I saw what I always saw, a girl who looked younger than her 19 years, too thin, too colorless, too unremarkable, but my eyes at least looked clear, determined even. If I was going to face humiliation, I would face it with my spine straight and my head high. The pups needed attention before we left. I'd fashioned a sling from a spare sheet, the kind human mothers sometimes use to carry babies against their chest. It would keep them close and secure. And more importantly, it would show the pack that I was taking my responsibility seriously, even if I didn't understand why I'd been given it. Storm went into the sling first, squirming and nipping at the fabric, before finally settling against my heart. Ember followed with less protest, as if she understood the necessity. They were warm against me, their combined weight substantial, but not unbearable. "All right," I said softly, checking my reflection one last time. "Let's go face whatever comes." The walk from my cottage to the Great Hall took 20 minutes under normal circumstances. Today it felt both endless and far too short. The path wound through the western woods before opening onto the main compound, where the important buildings clustered. The Great Hall at the center, the council chambers, the training grounds, the Alpha's residence. All of it surrounded by the homes of ranking pack members. My cottage sat far enough from the center that I could go days without seeing anyone if I chose. Now, as I walked toward the heart of pack territory with 2 pups pressed against my chest, I felt exposed in a way that made my skin crawl. I passed Miriam Ashwood hanging laundry outside her family's home. She stopped mid-motion, a wet shirt dripping in her hands, and stared at me with her mouth literally hanging open. Then she dropped the shirt and ran inside, no doubt to spread the news. By the time I reached the main square, small clusters of pack members had begun to gather, whispering behind their hands as I passed. I kept my eyes forward, my breathing steady, even as my heart tried to hammer its way out of my chest. Is that really Isla Thorne? What is she doing with the Alpha King's pups? There must be some mistake. She can't actually be in the trials. Look at her dress. Does she really think she can compete with Sienna and Vivian looking like that? The voices washed over me like cold water, each one a small cut, but I'd had 19 years of practice at being invisible, at letting words slide off me without leaving marks. I could survive this. I just had to keep walking. The Great Hall loomed ahead, its massive wooden doors carved with the history of our pack. Generations of alphas, great battles, sacred ceremonies. I'd been inside only a handful of times, always as invisible as possible, serving food or cleaning up after gatherings. Never as someone who mattered. Guards flanked the entrance, both of them shifting their weight uncomfortably when they saw me approaching. One of them, Jakob, who'd once thrown a stone at me when we were children, couldn't quite meet my eyes. "The Alpha King is expecting you," he said gruffly, pulling open one of the massive doors. The Great Hall was already filled with pack members, hundreds of them arranged in a semicircle around a raised platform at the far end. Every head turned as I entered, and the whispers rose to a dull roar that made the pups stir against my chest. I forced myself to breathe, to walk forward with measured steps even though every instinct screamed at me to run back to my cottage and hide. Then I saw them. Sienna Redclaw stood to the right of the platform, resplendent in a deep crimson dress that hugged her curves and showed off her warrior's build. Her auburn hair fell in perfect waves down her back, and she held a single pup, a large male with a distinctive black patch over one eye, with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to be there. Vivian Nightshade stood to the left, elegant in midnight blue, her severe beauty accentuated by the simplicity of her dress. She held a small female pup with pale gray fur, cradling it like something precious but maintaining perfect posture, perfect poise. And between them, on the platform itself, sat Alpha King Rowan. I'd seen him from a distance, but nothing had prepared me for the impact of his full attention. He was bigger than I'd realized, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, dressed in the formal black and silver of his station. His dark hair was pulled back from his face, revealing features that were more harsh than handsome. A strong jaw, a blade of a nose, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. But it was his eyes that stopped me mid-step. They were the color of amber, almost gold in the light streaming through the high windows. And they were fixed on me with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously seen and dissected. He saw everything. The cheap dress, the makeshift sling, my too pale hair, my fear. He saw me. Truly saw me. In a way no one had since Marjorie died. And he didn't look disappointed. Isla Thorne, his voice carried across the hall, deep and resonant. It wasn't loud, but every person in the room fell silent to hear it. Approach. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me forward even as my mind went blank with terror. The crowd parted, and I walked between them with my head up, one hand cupped protectively around the pups in their sling. When I reached the base of the platform, I stopped and dropped into the formal bow required when addressing the Alpha King. Or I tried to. But the movement jostled the pups, and Ember let out a squeak of protest. "Rise," Rowan said. And there was something in his tone, amusement. "The children are uncomfortable." I straightened quickly, adjusting the sling. "I'm sorry, Alpha King. I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize." He stood, and the movement made him even more imposing. "You came. You brought them safely. That's what matters." He descended from the platform, and suddenly he was right there, close enough that I could smell pine and leather, and something wild that made my wolf, my small, quiet wolf that I'd never fully shifted into, stir with recognition. Rowan reached out slowly, giving me time to flinch away if I wanted to, and gently pulled back the edge of the sling to look at the pups. Storm peeked up at him, let out a tiny yip, and then tried to climb out to reach his father. Something shifted in Rowan's expression, a softening around his eyes that transformed his harsh features into something almost tender. He carefully lifted Storm out of the sling, and the pup immediately licked his father's chin, wriggling with joy. "He missed you," I said without thinking, then wanted to bite my tongue. What right did I have to speak about the Alpha King's children as if I knew them? But Rowan glanced at me, that amber gaze piercing. "Did he tell you that?" They both settled when I held them, but Storm kept looking at the door, like he was waiting for someone. I was babbling now, nervous words spilling out, and Ember, the russet one. "She's possessive but gentle. She'll be a good protector when she's grown. And Storm is curious about everything. He tried to eat my lavender this morning." A sound escaped Rowan that might have been a laugh. "Lavender?" "I grow herbs," I explained, feeling my cheeks heat. For healing, Storm seemed to think they were all potentially delicious. Rowan studied me for a long moment, still holding Storm, who had calmed in his father's arms, but kept looking back at me as if to make sure I was still there. Then the Alpha King said, "You name them." It wasn't a question, and I realized my mistake too late. "I'm sorry. I had no right." I was just, "What did you name this one?" He lifted Storm slightly. "Storm," I whispered, because his coloring, and because he's fearless, like a storm that doesn't know anything can hurt it. "And the other?" "Ember, for the fire in her fur and in her spirit." Rowan's lips curved, just slightly, in what might have been approval. He tucked Storm back into the sling with surprising gentleness for such large hands, and the pup immediately snuggled against Ember, both of them settling as if they belonged there. Against my heart, in my arms, as if I were truly their mother. "The trials begin today," Rowan announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall once more. 3 females have been chosen. 3 females will be tested, not for their strength in battle. We have warriors enough. Not for their beauty. We have beautiful females aplenty. These 3 were chosen because when I watched them during the Harvest Moon Festival, when the children played and needed care, each of them showed something essential. He gestured to Sienna first. Sienna Redclaw showed courage and quick thinking when young Daniel climbed too high in the oak tree and froze. She climbed up after him, talking him down with patience and confidence. She was not afraid. Sienna lifted her chin, pride evident in every line of her body. Rowan turned to Vivienne. Vivienne Nightshade showed wisdom when the children began fighting over who would be pack leader in their games. She sat with them and turned their conflict into a lesson about strategy and compromise. She was not reactive. Vivienne inclined her head, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp with calculation. Then Rowan turned to me, and I felt the weight of the entire pack's attention like a physical thing. And Isla Thorne showed compassion when young Sarah fell and bloodied her knee, while others moved past, uncomfortable with the child's tears. Isla stopped. She cleaned the wound. She spoke softly. She made Sarah laugh by telling a story about a brave rabbit. She was not too busy, too important, or too uncomfortable with pain to care. The silence in the hall was absolute. I couldn't breathe. I barely remembered the moment he was describing. It had been nothing, just a crying child who needed help, but he'd seen it. He'd been watching, and he'd seen me when I thought I was invisible. "Aluna," Rowan continued, his gaze still locked on mine, "must be all of these things, courageous, wise, compassionate. Over the coming days, you will all be tested, The children will choose their mother, and I will choose my mate. He turned to address the hall. Let the trials begin. The pack erupted in a roar of approval. Or was it disapproval? I couldn't tell through the rushing in my ears. All I knew was that the Alpha King had seen me, had named me worthy of consideration, and nothing in my life would ever be simple again. The first trial was announced before the sunset that same day. We would each care for our assigned pups for 3 full days and nights in separate chambers within the Alpha's residence. We would be observed, evaluated, and at the end, the children would show their preference through the strength of the bond they'd formed. I'd never been inside the Alpha's residence. It was a sprawling stone structure built into the hillside, with wings that stretched in 3 directions and windows that caught every angle of light. Guards led us through corridors lined with tapestries depicting pack history, past chambers where I glimpsed other pack members going about important business, until finally we reached a wing that had been prepared for the trials. 3 doors, evenly spaced. 3 identical rooms, I was told, so no candidate would have advantage over another. Sienna entered her chamber first, her pup still calm in her arms, her head high. Vivienne followed, moving with that characteristic grace that made everything look effortless. Then it was my turn, and I stepped through the doorway into a space that was larger than my entire cottage. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, covered in furs and soft linens. A stone fireplace already crackled with warmth. There was a sitting area with comfortable chairs, a desk with paper and ink, shelves lined with books, and, most importantly, a smaller bed clearly designed for the pups, padded with soft blankets and positioned near enough to the main bed that a mother could reach it easily. Luxury. This was what pack hierarchy looked like up close. "You'll have everything you need," the guard said gruffly from the doorway. "Food will be brought 3 times daily. There's a bathing chamber through that door. Someone will check on you each evening to ensure the pups are well, but otherwise you're not to leave this room until the 3 days are complete." The door closed behind him with a soft thud that felt incredibly final. I stood there, holding Storm and Ember against my chest, and felt the enormity of the situation crash over me like a wave. 3 days. 3 days alone with these pups, being watched and judged, knowing that at the end, they would choose someone, and it almost certainly wouldn't be me. How could it be me? Sienna was strong, capable, born into rank and respect. Vivienne was brilliant, strategic, the kind of female who could rule beside a king and make him stronger. And I was the girl who lived in the forgotten cottage, who knew how to make chamomile tea ease a restless sleep, and how to make herself so quiet that people forgot she existed. Storm squirmed in the sling, interrupting my spiral of thoughts. Right. The pups didn't care about my inadequacies. They were hungry, probably confused about the new environment, and looking to me for comfort. I could do this part, at least. I could care for them. I set up their small bed first, arranging the blankets into a nest-like formation that would feel secure. Then I carefully released them from the sling, watching as they immediately began exploring the room with noses pressed to the floor, tails wagging. Ember found a leather ball in the corner. Someone had thoughtfully provided toys, and pounced on it with a delighted yip. Storm discovered his reflection in a polished metal panel on the wall and growled at it, hackles rising, before I scooped him up and carried him away, trying not to laugh. "That's you, silly one," I murmured against his soft fur. "You're growling at yourself." He licked my nose in response, and I felt that thread between us tighten another degree. The first meal arrived as the sun began to set. Not just food for the pups, but an elaborate dinner for me as well. Roasted meat, fresh bread, vegetables cooked with herbs I recognized, a slice of berry pie that made my mouth water. I ate mechanically, too anxious to truly enjoy it, while the pups demolished their own portions with enthusiastic growls. After dinner, I tried to settle them in their designated bed. They had other ideas. Ember climbed out immediately, padding across the floor to my bed, and scratching at the furs until I lifted her up. Storm followed, his little legs scrambling to make the jump, falling back, trying again with single-minded determination until I took pity on him and lifted him too. "You're supposed to sleep in your own bed," I told them, but they just curled up on the pillow beside where I would lay my head, snuggling together with contented sighs. Fine. Let the observers note that the pups preferred my bed. Maybe that would count for something, or maybe it would be seen as a failure to establish proper boundaries. I was too tired to care. I changed into the nightgown that had been provided, much finer than anything I owned, and slipped under the covers. The bed was softer than anything I'd ever experienced. The room was warm. The pups were safe. For the first time in years, I fell asleep feeling something other than alone. I woke to Storm howling. It was the middle of the night. The fire burned down to embers, and the small pup was sitting up in bed making the most mournful sound I'd ever heard. Ember had pressed herself against the headboard, whimpering, her ears flat against her skull. "What is it?" I sat up quickly, reaching for them. "What's wrong?" Storm's howl cut off, but he was shaking now, pressed against Ember. Both of them were staring at the window, where moonlight streamed through the glass. My heart hammered. Was there a threat? An intruder? I slipped out of bed and moved to the window, every sense alert. But there was nothing there, just the night, the moon, the peaceful grounds of the Alpha's residence stretching below. When I turned back, both pups had their eyes fixed on me, and I realized with a chill what was happening. They were afraid of being alone, of being abandoned. These were the Alpha King's children, but they were still babies. They'd been taken from wherever they normally slept, given to strange females, moved to unfamiliar rooms. Storm's howl hadn't been about external danger. It had been about waking up and needing to know his caretaker was still there. "I'm here," I said softly, climbing back into bed. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." I gathered them both against my chest, feeling their rapid heartbeats begin to slow. Storm made a small, questioning sound, and I started humming. An old lullaby my mother used to sing, one of the few things I clearly remembered about her. The melody filled the quiet room, wordless and gentle. Ember's breathing evened out first, her small body going heavy with sleep. Storm held out longer, as if fighting the comfort, but eventually, he too surrendered. I kept humming long after they'd fallen asleep, staring up at the ceiling and wondering if Sienna and Vivian were having similar moments in their chambers, or if their pups slept peacefully through the night, because their caretakers were more naturally suited to motherhood. The next 2 days fell into a rhythm. The pups would wake me at dawn, demanding breakfast and attention. We'd play. I'd roll the leather ball and they'd chase it, tumbling over each other in their excitement. I'd tell them stories, making up adventures about brave wolves who explored mysterious forests and protected their packs from danger. Storm loved the action stories, pouncing and growling at imaginary enemies. Ember preferred the ones where the heroes used clever thinking to solve problems, her intelligent eyes watching me as if memorizing every word. In the afternoons, when they napped, I'd read from the books on the shelves. Histories of our pack, legends of the first shifters, philosophies on leadership. Some of it was dry, but some of it fascinated me, filling gaps in my knowledge that came from being educated in fragments, by whoever would spare time to teach the orphan girl. Each evening, someone came to check on us. Never the same person twice. The healer, Cassia Birch, examined the pups and pronounced them healthy, thriving even. A council member whose name I didn't catch observed how they responded to my commands. Sit, stay, come, noting that they obeyed me despite their young age. And once, on the second night, Rowan himself appeared at the door. I'd been sitting by the fire, both pups asleep in my lap, reading aloud from a book of poetry, just because I liked the sound of the words. When I looked up and saw him filling the doorway, I nearly dropped the book. "Alpha King!" I scrambled to stand, trying not to disturb the pups, and managed an awkward curtsy that made Ember grumble in protest. "Sit," he said, the command gentle but absolute. "Don't wake them." I sank back down, hyper-aware of how I must look, hair loose around my shoulders, bare feet tucked under me, the vulnerable intimacy of being caught in a private moment. Rowan stepped into the room, and suddenly the large chamber felt small. He moved to stand by the fire, looking down at the pups sleeping peacefully in my arms. "They're content with you," he observed. "They're good pups," I said quietly. "Smart. Sweet. Storm is brave to the point of recklessness, but Ember watches out for him. They balance each other, like siblings should." His amber eyes flicked to me. "You've been reading to them." It wasn't a question. He must have been told. Or perhaps he'd been listening outside the door before entering. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I didn't know what else to do during their naps. The books were here, and I thought, I don't know. Maybe they'd like the sound of it. My mother used to read to me when I was small. Before... I trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. Before she died. Before I became alone. Before the fever took her, Rowan finished, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I remember. I was 18 when it swept through the pack. We lost 37 members in 2 weeks. I looked up sharply. You remember the fever? I remember every loss. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with me, and reached out to stroke Storm's fur with one finger. The pup sighed in his sleep, but didn't wake. I remember your parents specifically. Your father, Declan, saved my younger brother during a hunt when a boar charged. He stepped between them without hesitation. And your mother, Elena, made the medicine that kept half the pack alive long enough for the fever to break. My throat tightened. I didn't know anyone remembered them. I remember. His gaze held mine, and there was something in it that made my heart stutter. I also remember a small blonde girl who refused to cry at their funeral, who stood silent as stone while the pack mourned, who looked like she'd decided to become invisible rather than feel that pain again. He'd seen me. Even then, when I was 7 years old and he was the Alpha's teenage son, he'd seen me. I wasn't strong enough to stay visible, I whispered, or you were smart enough to survive the only way you could. Rowan stood, breaking the intensity of the moment. The trials aren't about strength, Isla. Not the kind most people think of. They're about finding someone who can stand beside me when everything is falling apart and still hold the center. Still remember that our pack is made of individuals, each one mattering, even the invisible ones. He moved toward the door, then paused. Storm howled last night. I heard it from my chambers. My stomach dropped. Of course he'd heard. His rooms were probably in this same wing. I'm sorry. He was frightened, and I don't apologize. I came to check on you both, but by the time I reached your door, you were humming that lullaby and they'd settled. He looked back at me over his shoulder. Sienna's pup didn't make a sound last night. Neither did Vivian's. But I wonder if that's because they didn't need comfort, or because their caretakers didn't hear them ask for it. He left before I could respond, the door closing softly behind him. I sat there by the dying fire, the pups warm in my arms, and felt something shift inside me, a tiny spark of possibility that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as inadequate as I'd always believed. On the morning of the third day, a guard came to escort us to the Great Hall. The other candidates would be there with their pups, and the first trial would conclude with the children showing their choice. I dressed in my green dress again. It had been cleaned and mended overnight by some unseen servant, and arranged my hair in the same simple braid. Then, I settled Storm and Ember into their sling, and they pressed against my heart as if they belonged there. Ready? I asked them softly. Ember licked my chin. Storm yipped. I took that as a yes. The walk through the Alpha's residence felt different this time. Pack members stopped to stare as I passed. But there was something new in their expressions. Not just shock or disdain, but curiosity. Speculation. As if they were seeing me as an actual possibility rather than a bizarre mistake. The Great Hall was even more crowded than it had been 3 days ago. Every pack member who could attend was there, crammed into every available space, their voices creating a din that made the pups press closer to me. Sienna was already positioned on one side of the platform, her pup looking healthy and well-groomed in her arms. Vivian stood on the other side, her pup appearing equally content. And in the center, once again, sat Alpha King Rowan on his throne. When I entered, his eyes found me immediately across the crowd, and something passed between us, an acknowledgement of that midnight conversation, of things said and unsaid. I took my place between the other candidates, my heart racing, and waited for whatever came next. Rowan stood, and the hall fell silent. The first trial is complete, he announced. 3 females have cared for 3 pups for 3 days and nights. Now we see what the children have learned. He descended from the platform and gestured for us to release the pups. This was it. The moment of truth. I knelt down and carefully lifted Storm and Ember from the sling, setting them on the floor. They wobbled for a moment, looking up at me with uncertain eyes, and I forced myself to smile even though my heart was breaking. Go on, I whispered. Choose where you belong. All 3 pups were released now, and they stood in the center of the hall, looking between their caretakers. Rowan walked to the far end, away from all of us, and knelt down. "Come," he called to them, his voice carrying. The pup with the black patch, Sienna's charge, immediately bolted toward Rowan, nearly tripping over his own paws in his eagerness to reach his father. Rowan caught him with a smile, setting him aside. Vivian's pale gray pup followed more cautiously, taking measured steps, reaching Rowan and sitting primly at his feet. Storm and Ember didn't move. They stood there looking at Rowan, then back at me, then at Rowan again. Storm whined, a questioning sound that tore at my heart. Ember paced in a small circle, agitated. "Come!" Rowan called again, more firmly. Storm took 2 steps toward his father, then stopped and looked back at me. His little face was so expressive, so torn between the male who'd sired him and the female who'd cared for him. I couldn't stand it. "Go to your father, Storm," I said, my voice cracking. "It's okay. Go on." But Ember had made her decision. She turned away from Rowan and padded back to me, pressing against my legs and looking up with those ancient eyes that said clearly, "This one. This is my mother." Storm watched his sister, then looked at Rowan one more time. The Alpha King's expression was unreadable, but he didn't call again. He just waited, letting his son choose. And Storm chose. He let out a little howl, not mournful like that first night, but determined, and ran back to me, joining Ember at my feet. The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Both of my pups had chosen me over their own father. They had bonded so completely in 3 days that they refused to leave my side. Rowan stood slowly, his face showing nothing. He looked at the other 2 pups, both of whom had obeyed his call, and then at Storm and Ember, pressed against my legs. When his gaze lifted to mine, I couldn't breathe. I'd failed. He'd called his children, and mine had refused him. That had to be a failure, a sign that I'd done something wrong, created an unhealthy attachment. But then Rowan smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face and made him look years younger. "Well," he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall, "it seems we have our answer." The reaction in the Great Hall was immediate and chaotic. Some pack members cheered, others looked scandalized, and still others whispered furiously among themselves as if trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. Through it all, Storm and Ember remained pressed against my legs, occasionally looking up at me as if to confirm I was still there, still theirs. Rowan raised his hand, and silence fell like a curtain dropping. "The children have spoken," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "But the trials are not yet complete. There will be 2 more tests before a final decision is made." He gestured to Sienna and Vivian. "You have both shown capability and care. Your pups responded to my call, showing healthy attachment to their father while trusting in your provision. This is good. This is what we hope to see." Then his amber eyes fixed on me, and I felt pinned in place by their intensity. Isla's pups chose differently. They bonded so deeply that they refused even their father's command to prioritize their connection to her. This is either a profound success or a concerning failure. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. The next trial will reveal which. I wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to defend myself or explain. But my throat was too tight, and my legs felt weak. Storm whined softly, sensing my distress, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, to project calm I didn't feel. "The second trial begins tomorrow at dawn," Rowan continued. "Each candidate will join a hunting party and demonstrate how they handle themselves outside the safety of our walls. Our territory faces threats, from rogues, from rival packs, from creatures that see us as prey rather than predators. A Luna must be able to protect, to think clearly under pressure, to make hard choices when lives are at stake." A hunting trial. My stomach twisted. I'd never been on a hunt. Omegas weren't typically included, and after my parents died, no one had thought to train me. I could shift barely into my wolf form, but it was small and weak compared to others in the pack. The idea of going beyond our protected borders, of facing actual danger. "You will each be assigned to a different hunting party," Rowan said. "Senior wolves will observe and report. The pups will remain here in the nursery, cared for by our most trusted attendants. We need to see how you function not as mothers, but as potential leaders who must sometimes leave safety behind to ensure the pack's survival." He looked at each of us in turn. "Return to your chambers. Rest. Tomorrow will test you in ways the first trial did not. The crowd began to disperse, their voices rising in excited speculation. I stood frozen until I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Come," said a soft voice. "Let's get the little ones settled." I turned to find Cassia Birch, the healer who'd checked on us during the first trial. Her round face was kind, her brown eyes warm with understanding. "I'll be caring for Storm and Ember during the hunt," she said. "They'll be safe with me, I promise. I raised 4 pups of my own, and I've helped with countless others." The thought of leaving them made my chest ache, but I nodded. "They like chamomile tea before bed. Just a little, mixed with warm milk. And Storm needs his belly rubbed or he can't settle. And Ember prefers to sleep on the left side, near the wall, where she feels protected." Cassia smiled. "I'll remember. They're lucky to have someone who notices such things." I knelt down, gathering both pups into my arms one more time. They licked my face enthusiastically, tails wagging, completely unaware that tomorrow I'd be facing something I was wholly unprepared for. "Be good," I whispered to them. "I'll come back. I promise I'll come back." Storm cocked his head, those intelligent eyes searching my face. Ember pressed closer, a small whine escaping her throat. Cassia gently took them from me, cradling one in each arm with practiced ease. "Go rest, Isla. They'll be fine. And you need to be sharp tomorrow." I watched them being carried away, Storm looking back over Cassia's shoulder until they disappeared through a doorway. The sense of loss was disproportionate to the few days I'd known them. But the bond we'd formed felt as real as anything I'd ever experienced. The walk back to my chamber felt lonely without their weight against my chest. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in the too large bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything I didn't know about hunting: how to track prey, how to work within a pack formation, how to fight if we encountered threats. I'd spent my life making myself small, invisible, unthreatening. Tomorrow I'd have to be the opposite. Sometime past midnight, I gave up on sleep and moved to the desk, lighting a candle. There were books about pack tactics, about the territories surrounding ours, about the kinds of rogues we might encounter. I read until my eyes burned, trying to absorb information that others had learned over years of training. One passage caught my attention. "A wolf alone is vulnerable. A wolf with pack is unbreakable. The strength of a Luna is not in her teeth or claws, but in her ability to hold the pack together when instinct screams to scatter." I read it 3 times, committing it to memory like a prayer. When dawn broke, I was already dressed and ready. Someone had provided leather hunting clothes, fitted pants, a sturdy tunic, boots that were worn but serviceable. My hair was braided tight against my skull to keep it out of my face. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the girl staring back. She looked capable, determined, like someone who might survive what was coming. The hunting parties assembled in the courtyard as the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. 3 groups of 5 wolves each, all of them experienced hunters, all of them watching the 3 candidates with varying degrees of skepticism or interest. Sienna was assigned to a group led by Commander Drake Ironwood, a massive wolf known for leading raids against rogues. She looked completely at ease, checking her weapons and joking with the warriors like she belonged among them. Vivian was placed with Scoutmaster Theron Swift's group, wolves who specialized in reconnaissance and strategy. She listened intently as Theron briefed them on their route, her sharp mind clearly already working through scenarios. I was assigned to Tracker Felix Moonwhisper's group, and when I approached, the 4 wolves with him exchanged glances that made my stomach sink. Felix himself was older, probably in his 50s, with gray streaking his dark hair and scars crisscrossing his arms. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were assessing. "You've hunted before?" he asked without preamble. "No, sir." "Better to be honest than to pretend and fail spectacularly. Can you shift fully?" "Yes, but my wolf is small." "Not very strong." Another exchange of glances among the group. One of them, a younger male with copper-colored hair, muttered something under his breath that sounded like, "This will be interesting." Felix held up a hand, silencing them. "Doesn't matter what size you are if you're smart and you listen. Our job today is to patrol the northern border where we've had reports of rogue activity. We track. We assess. We report. We only engage if absolutely necessary." He looked directly at me. "Your job is to stay alive and stay with the group. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Then let's move." The shift happened simultaneously for all of us. I felt my bones begin to crack and reform, felt fur ripple across my skin, felt my senses explode outward as my wolf took over. It hurt. It always hurt for me, more than it should. But I gritted my teeth through it and let the transformation complete. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. Colors were muted, but movement was sharper. Scents flooded my nose: pine, earth, the distinct musk of my packmates, the lingering smell of breakfast from the kitchens. My hearing picked up sounds from hundreds of yards away, but I was also acutely aware of my size. Felix's wolf was huge, easily twice my mass, with powerful shoulders and jaws that could crush bone. The others weren't much smaller, and I was. I looked like an adolescent next to them, pale-furred and delicate. Felix's wolf bumped against mine, a gesture that meant stay close, and then we were running. The border patrol took us through familiar woods that quickly became unfamiliar territory. We moved in formation, Felix in front, 2 wolves on the flanks, 1 guarding the rear, and me in the center, where I'd be most protected. It was both humiliating and practical. For the first hour, nothing happened. We covered ground quickly, Felix occasionally stopping to sniff the air or examine tracks in the soft earth. The rhythm of running felt good, natural, my muscles finding a cadence that didn't tire too quickly. Then Felix stopped abruptly, his body going rigid. The rest of us froze. I tasted the air, trying to understand what he sensed, and caught it. A scent that was wrong. Not pack, not prey animal, but something that made my hackles rise instinctively. Rogue wolves. Felix gestured with his muzzle, a complex series of movements that the others understood immediately. They shifted positions, creating a defensive formation. One of them nudged me toward a fallen log, indicating I should get behind it. Every instinct screamed at me to obey, to hide, to let the capable wolves handle this. But I remembered that passage from last night. The strength of a Luna is not in her teeth or claws, but in her ability to hold the pack together when instinct screams to scatter. I stayed in formation, pressing close to the wolf beside me, the copper-haired one who doubted me earlier. He glanced at me, surprised, but didn't push me toward the log again. The rogues emerged from the tree line slowly. 3 of them, mangy and lean, their eyes showing the madness that came from living outside pack structure for too long. They were smaller than Felix's group, but rogues fought with desperate ferocity that made them dangerous. Felix growled a warning, a deep rumble that said leave or face consequences. The rogues' answer was to spread out, circling, looking for weakness. They found it when they spotted me. The largest rogue lunged, going straight for me as the easiest target. Everything happened fast. The copper-haired wolf beside me intercepted, meeting the rogue mid-leap with a clash that sent both of them tumbling. The other 2 rogues attacked simultaneously, and suddenly Felix's orderly formation shattered into chaos. I dodged the snapping jaws of a rogue that broke through our defense, my smaller size making me quicker if not stronger. Fear made my heart pound, but underneath it, something else rose. A fierce protectiveness for these wolves who'd kept me safe, who were now bleeding because the rogues had targeted me. The copper-haired wolf yelped in pain. The rogue had him pinned, teeth going for his throat. I didn't think. I just moved. I was smaller, weaker, but I was also faster, and the rogue wasn't expecting me to attack. I hit him from the side, my teeth finding purchase in his shoulder, tasting blood and feeling him snarl in surprise. It was enough. The copper-haired wolf twisted free, and together we drove the rogue back. Felix and the others had dealt with the other 2 rogues, who were now fleeing back into the trees, wounded and knowing they'd lost. Our rogue tried to follow, but Felix cut him off, and the choice was clear: submit or die. The rogue submitted, belly up, throat exposed. Felix held him there for a long moment, establishing dominance, then released him with a final warning snap near his ear. The rogue scrambled away, limping, and disappeared into the forest. Silence fell, broken only by our panting breaths. The shift back to human form was worse when you were hurt. I felt it as my body reformed, felt new aches in places I'd been jostled or struck without realizing. But I was whole. We all were, though the copper-haired wolf had a nasty gash on his shoulder that was bleeding steadily. "Well," Felix said, his human voice rough, "that was educational." He looked at me with something new in his eyes, Not quite respect, but no longer dismissal. "You were supposed to stay safe," he said. "He was going to kill him," I replied, gesturing to the copper-haired wolf who was pressing a hand against his bleeding shoulder. I couldn't just watch. "No," Felix said slowly. "I suppose you couldn't." The copper-haired wolf, his name was Ryan, I learned, met my eyes. "Thank you. That was either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," I admitted. Felix barked a laugh. "Come on. Let's get Ryan patched up and report back. I think the Alpha King will be interested to hear about this." As we made our way back toward pack territory, moving slower to accommodate Ryan's injury, I noticed the wolves no longer kept me in the protected center. I ran with them, beside them, as if I belonged. It was a small thing, but it felt like everything. We returned to the compound as the sun reached its peak, and the courtyard was already buzzing with activity. The other 2 hunting parties had arrived before us, and I could see Sienna standing tall and unmarked, laughing with Commander Drake's group. Vivienne looked composed as always, though there was dirt on her clothes that suggested her patrol hadn't been entirely uneventful. Then they saw Ryan's shoulder, still bleeding despite the makeshift bandage we'd fashioned from strips of his shirt, and the conversation died. Rowan appeared from the great hall, his expression darkening as he took in our group. His eyes swept over each of us, lingering on Ryan's wound, then landing on me with an intensity that made me want to both step forward and retreat. "Report," he commanded, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Felix stepped forward. "We encountered 3 rogues at the northern border, Alpha King. They attacked when they identified the weakest member of our group." His gaze flicked to me, and I felt my cheeks burn with shame. The candidate engaged when Ryan was compromised. Her intervention allowed him to recover position. No permanent damage to our pack, all rogues driven off or subdued. The silence that followed was crushing. I could feel every eye on me, could sense the judgment forming. The weak Omega who'd needed rescuing, who'd put the hunting party at risk just by being there. But Rowan's response surprised me. "Ryan," he called out, "what's your assessment?" Ryan straightened despite his obvious pain. "She saved my life, Alpha King. The rogue had me pinned. I was seconds from a torn throat when she attacked from his blind side. She's small, but she's fast, and she didn't hesitate." He paused, then added, "She fights for pack. That's what matters." Rowan nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving my face. "Cassia, see to Ryan's wound. The rest of you, dismissed to your quarters. We'll convene tomorrow for the final trial." As the crowd dispersed, Rowan approached me. Up close, I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands flexed at his sides as if restraining himself from some action. "You could have died," he said quietly, his voice for my ears alone. So could Ryan. "Ryan is a trained warrior who knew the risks." "You're... what?" I interrupted, surprised by my own boldness. "Not worth protecting? Not capable of making my own choices? I saw a packmate in danger and I acted. Isn't that what you're looking for in a Luna? Someone who won't abandon wolves just because it's dangerous?" His amber eyes blazed with something I couldn't name. "It's also what got your father killed." He stepped between my brother and that boar, and it cost him everything. Cost you everything. The words hit like a physical blow. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't live with that every day?" My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. But he made a choice. He chose to protect someone weaker. And maybe that's why I'm still here. Because he showed me that's what matters. Not staying safe. Not staying invisible. Protecting pack. Rowan stared at me for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair that had escaped my braid behind my ear. The gesture was gentle, intimate, completely at odds with his harsh expression. "You terrify me," he said softly, "and I'm not easily frightened." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the courtyard with my heart pounding and my mind racing. That evening, Cassia brought Storm and Ember to my chamber. They launched themselves at me the moment she set them down, yipping and climbing over each other to reach me first, their joy so pure it made my eyes sting. "They missed you," Cassia said with a warm smile, especially when the sun started setting. "Storm howled for you twice." I gathered them both into my arms, feeling their small hearts beating against mine, feeling the bond snap back into place like a rope that had been stretched but not broken. "Did you hear?" Cassia asked, settling into one of the chairs. About what you did today? I'm sure everyone heard. They're talking about it. Some say you were reckless. Others say you were brave. She leaned forward, her expression serious. But what they're all saying, Isla, is that you fought for Pack. That when it mattered, you didn't think about yourself. You thought about saving a packmate. I just reacted, I said, stroking Ember's soft fur. There wasn't time to think. That's exactly it. Cassia's eyes were knowing. When there's no time to think, we show who we really are, and you showed everyone that underneath that quiet, invisible exterior, you have the heart of a Luna. After she left, I sat with the pups and tried to process everything that had happened. Tomorrow was the final trial, and I still had no idea what it would entail, but something had shifted today, not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. Maybe I wasn't as weak as I'd always believed. Maybe survival wasn't just about staying small and quiet. Maybe it was also about knowing when to stand up, when to fight, when to refuse to let fear make your choices for you. Storm climbed up to lick my face, and I laughed despite my exhaustion. What do you think, little warrior? Can I do this? His answering yip sounded distinctly like yes. The final trial was announced at dawn, a formal council session where each candidate would be questioned about their vision for the Pack's future. It would be held in the Great Hall with every ranking member present, and our answers would determine who the council supported as Luna. I'd never spoken in front of the council. I'd never spoken in front of any large group. The thought of standing before them, of having my words scrutinized by wolves who'd barely acknowledged my existence until a week ago, made my stomach churn with anxiety. But I had no choice. This was the final test. We gathered in the Great Hall as the morning sun streamed through the high windows. The council sat in a semicircle on the raised platform, 12 wolves who represented different aspects of Pack life. Warriors, healers, scholars, traders, scouts, and in the center, in the Alpha's seat, sat Rowan, watching with those unreadable amber eyes. Sienna went first. She spoke confidently about strengthening our warrior training, about expanding our territory, about building alliances through shows of force. Her vision was clear, decisive, focused on external strength. The council nodded approvingly. Several asked clarifying questions, which she answered with the ease of someone who'd been raised understanding Pack politics. Vivian went second. She discussed internal organization, improving our trade networks, establishing better communication systems between Pack families. Her vision was intelligent, practical, focused on efficiency and structure. Again, approving nods. The council clearly respected her strategic mind. Then it was my turn. I stood before them in my simple green dress, my blonde hair braided plainly, my hands trembling slightly at my sides. Every eye in the hall was on me, and I felt the weight of their expectations. Or rather, their lack of expectations. Isla Thorne, Council Elder Miriam Ashwood said, her voice formal. What is your vision for this Pack's future? I took a breath, thinking about Storm and Ember sleeping peacefully in the nursery, thinking about Ryan bleeding in the forest, thinking about all the years I'd spent invisible, and all the wolves who were still invisible, because no one looked at them. My vision, I said, and my voice was quieter than Sienna's or Vivian's, but it was steady, is a Pack where no one has to be invisible to survive. Murmurs rippled through the hall. I pressed on. I've listened to both previous candidates, and they're right. We need strong warriors. We need good organization. These things are essential. I met Rowan's gaze. But we also need to see each other, really see each other. Not just the wolves who are strongest or most useful, but all of us. The Pack already cares for its members, Counselor Theron Swift said, his tone skeptical. We have systems in place. Do we? I asked gently. Because I spent 12 years living alone in a cottage at the edge of our territory, and no one checked if I had enough food or if I was safe or if I needed help. I wasn't being punished. I just didn't matter enough to notice. The silence that fell was uncomfortable. Good. I'm not saying this to complain, I continued. I'm saying it because I can't be the only one. How many other wolves are we not seeing? The elderly who live alone and might need help but are too proud to ask. The young who don't fit the warrior mold but have other gifts. The injured who need more than physical healing. The grieving who need more than time. I looked around the hall, meeting eyes, letting them see me seeing them. A Luna's job isn't just to stand beside the Alpha King. It's to hold the pack together, all of it. Not just the parts that are easy to see or comfortable to acknowledge. It's to make sure that when someone falls through the cracks, someone notices, someone cares, someone reaches down and pulls them back up. Elder Miriam's expression had softened. And how would you accomplish this vision? I would start by listening, I said, by going to the edges of our territory, to the forgotten places, and asking what people need. I would organize support networks, matching those who have resources with those who need them. I would make sure our children know they're valued for more than their fighting ability. I hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. I would make sure no child ever feels as alone as I did after my parents died. My voice cracked on the last words, but I didn't look away, didn't hide. Rowan leaned forward in his seat. You speak of compassion, of connection. These are admirable qualities. His tone was careful, measured. But what about when compassion isn't enough? What about when hard decisions must be made? Decisions that will hurt some wolves for the good of the pack. This was the real test. The question beneath the question. I believe, I said slowly, that hard decisions are easier to accept when wolves know their leader actually sees them. When they trust that their pain matters, even if it's necessary. I thought about yesterday's hunt. I'm not strong like Sienna. I'm not brilliant like Vivian, but I fought for Ryan yesterday not because I'm brave, but because in that moment, his life was the only thing that mattered. And I think that's what a Luna needs to be able to do. To look at any member of this pack and know, really know, that their life matters. That they're worth fighting for. Rowan's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. The council deliberated for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. They spoke in low voices, gesturing occasionally, while I stood there trying not to collapse from the anxiety coursing through my body. Finally, Elder Miriam stood. The council has made its decision, she announced. While we respect all three candidates, we believe the choice is clear. My heart stopped. This was it. They would choose Sienna or Vivian, and I would return to my cottage, and Storm and Ember would be given to whoever became Luna, and... We support Isla Thorne as the Alpha King's chosen Luna. The hall erupted. Some wolves cheered, others looked shocked. Sienna's face went carefully blank, but I saw the flash of hurt before she controlled it. Vivian simply nodded, as if she'd expected this outcome. But I couldn't focus on any of them, because Rowan had stood, had descended from the platform, was walking toward me with purpose in every step. He stopped inches away, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see flecks of gold in those amber eyes. "Do you accept?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched for my ears alone. "Do you choose this? Choose me? Choose a life where you'll never be invisible again? Where every decision you make will be watched and judged? Where the weight of the pack will rest on your shoulders alongside mine?" I thought about my cottage at the edge of the woods, about safety and solitude and the peace of being overlooked. Then I thought about Storm and Ember, about Ryan bleeding in the forest, about all the invisible wolves who needed someone to see them. "I accept," I whispered. "I choose this. I choose you." Rowan's hands came up to cup my face, his touch gentle despite his strength. "You were never invisible to me," he said softly. "From the moment I saw you comfort that child, I saw you. And I knew I needed someone beside me who understood what it meant to be overlooked, who would fight for those no one else fought for." Then he kissed me, in front of the entire pack, in front of the council, in front of everyone who'd ever dismissed me as unworthy. And when he pulled back, his eyes held a warmth that transformed his harsh features into something beautiful. "My Luna," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My mate. My equal." The pack roared its approval, and somewhere in the nursery, I heard two small howls join the celebration. Storm and Ember, recognizing their mother had been chosen, that we were family now, all of us together. The mating ceremony happened 3 days later, under the full moon, with the entire pack as witnesses. I wore a dress of silver and white, my blonde hair left loose to catch the moonlight. Rowan stood beside me in formal black. And when we made our vows, when the pack bond snapped into place, making me not just Luna, but truly part of the collective consciousness of every wolf present, I felt complete for the first time since my parents died. Storm and Ember, officially named now, my right as their mother, stood at our feet during the ceremony, small but present, a symbol of the family we were creating. After the formal parts ended and the celebration began, Rowan pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the grounds. "I need to tell you something," he said, his expression serious. "About why I really chose you." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "I watched all the unmated females during the Harvest Moon Festival. I watched how they interacted with children, with elderly wolves, with each other. Most were kind enough. Some were genuinely good." He paused. "But you were the only one who stopped for Sarah, who didn't just comfort her but actually saw her pain and took time to heal it, even though you had no obligation to do so, even though no one was watching. Or so you thought. You were testing us? Even then?" "Not testing, observing." His hands found mine. "I needed a Luna who would see the wolves I might miss, who would care about the ones who don't demand attention, who would build a pack based on connection, not just hierarchy." His amber eyes held mine. "I needed you, Isla, not despite your past, but because of it. Because you understand what it means to be forgotten, and you'll make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Tears stung my eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I won't let you down," I promised. "I know." He kissed my forehead. "You couldn't if you tried." The months that followed were a whirlwind of learning and growing. Rowan taught me about pack leadership, about politics and strategy. But he also learned from me, learned to slow down, to listen more carefully, to notice the quiet wolves who stood at the edges of gatherings. Together, we established the Luna's Network, a system where wolves could request help anonymously, where resources were shared, where no one fell through the cracks. I visited every corner of our territory, learning names and stories, making sure everyone knew they mattered. Storm and Ember grew quickly, their personalities becoming more distinct with each passing week. Storm became my shadow, following me on my rounds, his curious nature making him beloved by everyone he met. Ember preferred to stay close to Rowan, learning strategy and leadership with the same careful observation she'd shown since birth. Sienna and Vivian both found their places. Sienna became Commander Drake's second, leading our warriors with courage and skill. Vivian joined the council officially, her strategic mind proving invaluable. They'd both been gracious about the trial's outcome, and over time, we developed a mutual respect that grew into genuine friendship. And my cottage at the edge of the woods, we kept it. On difficult days, when being Luna felt overwhelming, Rowan and I would go there with the pups and remember where we'd started. Remember that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply refuse to stay invisible. One evening, almost a year after the trials, I stood on the Alpha's residence balcony, watching the sun set over our territory. Storm and Ember were wrestling on the grounds below, their play fighting making me smile. Rowan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how a year ago, I woke up with 2 pups in my bed and thought my life was ending," I said softly. "And now I understand that it was just beginning." I turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me. Thank you for choosing me back," he said, kissing me gently. "For choosing all of us." Below, Storm let out a triumphant howl as he pinned Ember. She squirmed free immediately and pounced on him, and their joyful yips filled the evening air. We had built something beautiful, not just a mating, but a family. Not just a leadership, but a pack that truly saw and valued every member. And as the moon rose over our territory, painting everything in silver light, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. No longer invisible, no longer alone. Finally, completely home.